Welcome to Exchanging Notes. I'm John, and today I have the privilege of conversing with Alissa York. Alissa is the author of 3 novels, Mercy, Effigy, and Fauna, and 1 collection of short stories, Any Given Power. I'm trying to think of how to quantify Alissa York to you, and I came up with this idea that, you know how some people, wherever they go, they have lots of space around them. They just look they look like they have acres of space. Other people seem to live in smaller, more crowded places. And I have this sense from reading Alissa York's work that she lives in a world that's crowded with a lot of memories of mind and memories of muscle and rituals and objects and people who want different things and people who are different people to different people. Yet despite all this going on in her work, there's a sense of spaciousness about it, because Alissa very effectively submerges her voice in the voice of various characters and moves amongst those characters very deftly. So you never really feel like there's too much going on. But the fact that she does that so effectively also means that when I read one of her books, I really can't tell you what sort of person wrote this book, which is kind of good because we're going to do the interview now and we're going to find out. Hello, Alissa York.
Hello, John.
Thank you for dropping into Exchanging Notes.
Oh, my
Today,
pleasure.
We're going to find out who you really are. What is your favorite story in the collection? What is the one that you look at and say, that's a well-written story?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It's hard to say, right? Like, there's one called The Back of the Bear's Mouth, and that's been republished a lot. And so sometimes I think, oh, yeah, that's the, you know. But really, I think the one that's closest to my heart is one called Sad Bastards.
And why is that? What is it?
Sad Bastards, you know, a friend of mine told me a story about this ill-fated hunting trip with his father. And I just, you know, his father had a flashback to the war when they were in a boat out in the middle of a lake. And it just stuck with me for years and percolated away. And then one day I knew that there would be this short story. But I think what was best about the writing of that story was that I thought I knew how it was going to end. And this incredible flip happened at the end that was so exciting and surprising to me as I was writing it. I still remember the bodily sensation of writing that story. I could barely keep up with my pen, and I was weeping, and because I was so excited about what happened at the end of that story. So I think the memory of writing it makes
What
it
did
my
the
favorite.
experience of putting together a collection teach you about the craft of writing and yourself as a writer?
Well, it taught me that some things take a lot more work than others. That I mean, there's a famous quote that I always remind myself about by the poet Al Purdy, I'm a big fan of his, and he said, you know, people ask me, how do you write a poem? And my answer is always, I don't know. Because every poem that you write you start from the beginning. So you learn as you go along, you work on your craft, but everything's different, right? Every scene that I work on the novel I'm working on now, some of them, no problem. Other one, days go by to write 3 pages. And a synopsis of Mercy. Being my first novel, when I gave my first interview about that, I gave this big, long synopsis about how the land holds memory, and I came out and my publicist said, that was good, but we're going to lead with, it's a love triangle. Like, okay, it's a love triangle. It's a love triangle between a butcher, his young wife, who's the niece of the Catholic Church housekeeper, and the new Catholic priest. And then it is the echo of that story that happens a generation later in the same place, which is a small made-up town in Manitoba and the neighboring Black Spruce Bog. And it's also about how the land holds memory.
That's very good. I'm glad we have that recorded because I can use it in the future.
Yeah.
There is possibly a tendant upon the way that you switch points of view, and you show one character from their point of view, and then you show that character from somebody else's point of view. There seems to be sort of always an attendant ambivalence with your characters. There is a scene in Mercy in which Thomas Rose, the butcher, is killing a calf, and he strokes the calf's head, and then you write, then swings tenderly, the blow landing precisely where his fingers have been. Does that speak to an ambivalence that you have about people generally? That,
I mean, whenever I'm teaching or mentoring with other writers, we end up very often talking about creating complex characters. This is one of the most important things that we're trying to do. And very, very, very few people think of themselves as wholly good or wholly bad, right? And very few people are. And so when you're writing someone and you get inside them, it becomes natural to me to understand them as a blend. So, for example, when I first started out working on Thomas, he was this kind of brutal man, because that was growing out of these scenes where I was researching butchery, right? And then, in this beautiful kind of confluence that happens in the research process, I was also researching autism, and I read the works of Temple Grandin. If any of you have read Temple Grandin, she's a very high-functioning autistic woman who develops humane slaughterhouses, feedlots, etc. And so suddenly there was this cross-pollination between the streams, I'm mixing my metaphors, between the different flowers of research, and I ended up with this incredibly kind, fairly ineffectual, artistically thwarted butcher who was much more interesting than the brute I had first conceived of. And I had to be receptive to that when it came along, right? If I said, no, that's not who Thomas is, then he wouldn't have been as interesting a character for me, I think, or for readers.
She's gorgeous.
Yes.
You have a book that is nearing completion, a manuscript nearing completion. Do you want to do a bit of PR, get people revved up to hit those bookstores and Kindle to buy it? What do you want to tell us about it?
Well, it's strangely enough, just like Effigy, it's set in 1867, and that happened accidentally, which is the kind of thing that makes me feel like I'm on track. And it actually is mostly set in the Amazon, and it's based around a fictional naturalist expedition to the Amazon in the mid-19th century.
Is it
not complicated at all.
Is there a monosyllabic title? Is there a one-word title?
No, as far as I know, there are 2 words in the title. I'm breaking the mold.
Oh, that's no good.
Yeah.
That's no good.
Well, remember, Any Given Power, I started with 3.
Yeah, but then you became a minimalist and forsook all that.
I know.
Questions?
Agnes.
When you're writing your short stories or novels, do you have an ending in sight and then kind of wind your way to that ending, or do you sort of go along and let the characters lead you to the ending?
I have an ending in sight, but in the writing of it, it can often change or come to mean something that I didn't know it meant, or reveal itself to be near the ending but not quite the actual ending, or those kinds of things. But that happens more often with short stories, like I mentioned with Sad Bastards, that there was that crazy thing that happened in writing the ending where it did a flip. With the novels, because I work on them for so long, I think that the ending will have time to kind of crystallize. So by the time I get to it, but honestly, with any of the 3 that I've completed and the one I'm working on now, I proceed in faith to a great degree in terms of things working out in the right order. And I do sort of see the ending down there. And as I say, I do all that obsessive organizing beforehand, but then it's so that I can get in the middle of it and mess around. Yeah.
I love your work, and I just
thank you.
wanted to talk more about your animal themes and how they shape and influence your writing, and what your sort of personal politics are about animals, because you write such interesting themes, taxidermy and hunting and butchering. So I'm just curious to know more.
Yes, animal themes in my work. I'm very tender-hearted about animals. I am extremely interested in animals. So today, for example, there was a squirrel in the tree outside my window, and I stood watching it for about 10 minutes, and it was doing nothing. It was just being a squirrel. And I've seen a million of them. But it was close to me, it was wildlife, and it was beautiful, and it was a good, really good part of my day. So I used to be a vegan, but I fell off that wagon, so I do all these kind of compromises of, I try and buy the better meat, and I feel guilty, and I try and eat more beans, and, I do all that stuff that one does when one is aware, but kind of keeping the... I'm horrified by so many of the ways in which we interact with animals. So in fauna, there's a lot of stuff that happens where the animals come up against the humans and the animals don't do so well. And we all kind of understand that that happens all the time. And we love to tell stories where the animals come up against the humans and the animals do something terrible, right? We're always telling ourselves those stories. And I always think, oh yeah, the great white, how many great whites get slaughtered every time there's a shark attack? How many people are attacked by sharks? I mean, I would hate to be attacked by a shark. I have a hard time not thinking about it. I have Australian parents that say, I've heard all these terrifying stories. And then they picked the boy in the middle of the crowd because he'd had fish for lunch. They love those kind of stories. Oh no. But... at the same time, I never did see that documentary Sharkwater. I couldn't bear it. I mean, I know those are out there. And The Chimps of Fauna Sanctuary, have you read that book by Andrew Westall? I mean, I don't know when I've wept so much in my life. All these chimps that have been saved and are living in the sanctuary, and you're reading about what the humans have been doing to them all these years. Unbelievable. So... yeah, I don't really have that line, right, where you say, this is how we should treat humans, and this is how we will treat the other creatures. But then the truth is, we lie to ourselves about that line all the time, right? This is how we must treat humans, except if they're homeless, or they live in a country far away from us, or we can tell ourselves that it's their fault for some reason, or they happen to be addicted to something, or they were mean to me once, or, so then, of course, we can do it with animals. So I try not to have that self and other thing as much as I can with everything. And I fail all the time.
Thank you all for coming out.
Yes, thank you.
Lisa, thank you again. Small but appreciative.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.